Thank you for joining us today. We know it's been a long day, and we appreciate you taking the time and not skipping out early to go to a happy hour. We're excited to share with you today about how to run your VMware workloads in Azure with Azure VMware Solution. I'm 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, a Senior Product Marketing Manager.
I'm Amy Collier, a Senior Cloud Advocate.
Without further ado, this is our agenda today. So we're going to start with a product overview, but I'd like to pulse the audience. How many of you already know what Azure VMware Solution is? Raise your hands. Oh, wow.
Nice.
So most people. I'll skip over that quite quickly. How many of you are current customers? OK, so less. So we've got a lot of people considering it. And that's great, because we're going to go through everything from pre-migration planning and assessment, walking through some of the tools and processes that we have in place, some of our common migration scenarios, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of connecting to Azure and deployment, common networking architectures, migrating with HCX. And then at the end of the session, we've got a couple of demos that we'll walk you through, and then we'll recommend some day one best practices and common integrations. So let's start with talking about some of the common challenges that you may have when considering migrating your VMware from on-premises to something like Azure VMware Solution or other products that you may consider. One of the big things is compatibility issues, that making sure whatever environment you're going into has, addresses the differences in security, in networking, and in some of the disk formats that you might have on premises. Another big consideration is protecting sensitive data and making sure that you remain compliant. And that obviously differs depending on where you're running your workloads, in what region of the world. Another big thing is downtime and stability, skill gaps, cost management. We all know migrations can be costly and time-consuming. And that greatly increases depending on the complexity of your applications, as well as some of the dependencies. And that's why it's really important to choose the right vendor and prioritize workloads effectively. The exciting part about this is AVS is designed, and AVS being Azure VMware Solution, is designed to mitigate these challenges and make it as easy and quick as possible to get your VMware workloads into the cloud. So this is the case because Azure VMware Solution provides a symmetrical environment mirroring what you're currently running on premises today. You get access to private cloud, powered by Azure, and these are dedicated hosts running in Azure data centers. And you can continue to use the VMware licenses that you've grown accustomed to, including vCenter, vSphere, ESXi, vSAN, and more. And we make this really easy because we can connect to your on-premise environment via ExpressRoute or a VPN, and also enable hybrid operations. And this all runs, again, on VMware certified hardware that's fully managed by Microsoft. And what's even better is once you land in Azure, you have access to over 200 Azure services to further modernize your VMware workloads and get them to the next step. Those include things like our portfolio of Azure security services, Azure Monitor, storage offerings, and we're going to dive into those today, so I won't spend much time there. And we also have a robust ecosystem of partners and third-party services available through our marketplace for things such as disaster recovery, again, storage integrations, data protection, and more. So let's talk about how we turn the tide on traditional IT operations and free up your team to focus on what matters most, which is moving your business forward. With Azure VMware Solution, again, we take a lot of the things off your hand, including, managing physical assets, making sure your servers are cool, that they have the right power, real estate. This all adds complexity and demands your attention. Not to mention patching older workloads and getting extended security updates, which are all free and available in Azure. I'd like you to raise your hand if you enjoy patching ESXi hosts.
Right. Well,
I see a few hands. Yeah, there's a few hands. Well, let's talk about racking and stacking and setting up all the networking on the back end that comes with that.
Yeah. There's some.
So one hand. I know folks like Amy have had to do that in the past, but
Yeah.
Amy, what are some of the key advantages you've seen from a management perspective with AVS versus VMware on-prem?
Well, what I like, and so my last customer role, we had pagers because it was a hospital, so I got a nice pager, and I would get paged if ESXi host went down. So I don't get that now because the remediation happens behind the scenes. You're still sleeping. And I mean, patching is kind of therapeutic, but yeah, I don't have to like worry about rolling those patches. And because at one time I was patching a host, I think, had an SOP, so I could do it during the day, but then I like rebooted it while it was still doing things, caused an outage. So now I don't have to worry about, you know, creating issues in production. So just to name a few.
So let's talk about what's included with Azure VMware Solution. We have a variety of different SKUs depending on what your needs and requirements are. I won't go into these in great detail, but we have a few different options. Again, this is fully managed, so no matter what option you choose, you get technical support, upgrades, and patches from Microsoft. We're your one point of contact. And although you continue to be able to use VMware licenses, you're procuring those through Microsoft. And you can obviously see the variety of options you have here, as well as your ability to add on other services as needed. So let's talk about planning your migration and some of the tools we have in place. Today, Amy and I are focused on steps 1 through 4 here. So really what it takes to properly rehost your workloads, and once you land them in Azure, some of the day one capabilities that you'll want to consider. I would like to mention that we have another breakout later this week, which is more focused on the modernized steps. So how to make your VMware workloads more performant, resilient, and how you can even integrate with some of our cutting edge AI services. But we're focused on that front end to make sure that you're set up for success. When you're planning for a migration to Azure VMware Solution, whether you're a novice or an expert, we have a robust ecosystem of partners, so we recommend that you start there. I will be sharing some resources later on today that you can use to kickstart your journey. But I would like to really drive in the point that when you work with Azure, we have best practices from partners and customers alike that we've developed across the years. We've done these migrations thousands of times, and that has helped inform our Azure well-architected framework, which is our framework that you can use to design and improve the quality and stability of your workloads running in Azure. So that's everything to help you optimize costs, to increase security, and we have this available in a variety of different online resources. We also have landing zones in place. So if you've already migrated to Azure, you probably are familiar with the broader Azure landing zone. But it's like a puzzle, and we've actually got a piece specifically for Azure VMware Solution to set you up for success and achieve enterprise scale for the different workloads that you might be running or moving over. So this is great, and a great accelerator. It sets the groundwork for stability and scalability once you land in Azure. So let's go into some migration scenarios. You're never just moving virtual machines. They have dependencies. You're running your applications as well as the databases that support them, and you need to bring those over at the same time. And I'm just going to call out a couple of common scenarios here, which are SQL Server database migrations, as well as Oracle databases, and some of the different options that you might consider as you're moving over to AVS. So let's start with SQL. You can always run your applications on Azure VMware Solution, and in fact, we very much recommend that. It's the easy lift and shift option with very little to no refactoring. But then when you're talking about your data tiers, you can also run those on AVS, and that's really great for a quick and easy migration. It allows you to continue using the same tools and processes, and you retain full control over those SQL Server configurations and updates that you have in place. But if you have a larger database, SQL Server on Azure VMs is a wonderful option because that provides more compute and storage options, as well as access to a few different services. And with that, you can still maintain OS level control. Now, over time, and I don't recommend this necessarily from day one, but some of you may be ready and off to the races, we also have Azure SQL PaaS, and that's best for long-term modernization because it allows you to take advantage of the full scale of the cloud. It's a fully managed database service, and you get automatic maintenance, backups, and updates. And when we're talking about Oracle, the story is quite similar, right? Again, you can move your database over and run your database and application tier in Azure VMware Solution. And this is really great for non-Oracle Exadata workloads that are more of a commodity, running on commodity hardware, something that's more common. If you have larger databases, you can run it in Azure VMs. And we've got Oracle Database in Azure, and that's great for lifting and shifting your Oracle Exadata and RAC upload databases into the cloud in parallel with your VMware workloads. So I know that has typically been a blocker for a lot of customers in the past, especially if there's dependencies there. But again, you can move everything up. And in Azure, we have a destination, whether you're running VMware, Oracle, or other types of workloads, and they're all very high performance. So with that, let's get into the nitty-gritty of connecting and deploying. I'd love to pass it off to Amy now.
Sure. Thanks, Liam. Right, so we have the assessment tools and the planning tools for you, the well-architected framework assessment. It helps guide you through the best practices, like, hey, you should be using a firewall. So let's now go through connecting and deploying and what that looks like. So here's just how the solution works. You have your on-prem environment where you have vCenter running, bare metal ESXi hosts, and on the right, within Azure, you have the same exact thing. Bare metal ESXi hosts running with the vCenter, vSAN, all that storage. But now you're closer to Azure services. So you still have to create a connection into Azure, but you're on that fast backbone. So now you can integrate to things like blob storage, start using Defender for Cloud, Entra ID. There's so many, or SQL Managed Instance Database, like Liam mentioned. And then there's that Azure Express route, which is included with your AVS purchase. And you can use that to connect to your on-premises environment or even use a VPN. And this is what it looks like in the portal for deploying. But we have that Azure landing zone, or the AVS landing zone, where it really accelerates your deployment. And you can use Terraform, ARM, Bicep, or click through the portal, and it will walk you through the steps. But if you go through the portal, you want to create a service ticket, request your nodes, at least 3. And then once you get it assigned to your subscription, you obviously go in, you start creating a private cloud, give it a usable name, pick your resource group. Location's very important. Right now we have 33 locations, but as we move to that AV64 node, that's fleet hardware, that means more locations will be available soon. So that's, right now we have the Dell solution, but then the fleet hardware will make things more available. And then, so you pick that size of your host depending on your needs, and then you can pick whether you're gonna use availability zones, like keep them in one, or if you're gonna do a stretch cluster, you would have 2 in one availability zone and then 2 in another. So you can do that as well. And then, of course, with planning, you have to have it your /22 CIDR. So you want to have that mapped out for your Azure VMware environment and then all your VNets to make sure everything goes smoothly. We also have a network design guide that walks you through the traffic flows that helps you decide that. So here we are deployed maybe 4 to 6 hours later because it's got to spin up those hosts and connect everything on the back end. And then you can see we have 3 hosts across availability zone 1. That's logical, not physical. And we're not stretched. So we're deployed, we're in the portal, and we'll go over what the availability zone mappings look like. So when you create a subscription, you can get up to 3 availability zones, but they logically map differently. So I might have 2 subscriptions, and here I have AZ1 mapped to my physical data center AZ1, but maybe I have a second subscription where AZ3 is mapped to AZ1. So it really depends on what it grabs when you deployed. And so each data center, though, is at least in a physical location where they're close enough so there's no latency. But if there's a disaster, hopefully it doesn't impact the other data center, and it gives you more resiliency. So with this mapping, though, we have an API, so you can retrieve that. So you can see that, oh, logical zone 2 is actually mapped to East US AZ3. And the reason that is important is you want to deploy things close to AVS. If you're going to deploy NetApp files, or your SQL instance, you want it to be in that same availability zone for the closest connection. And you can use Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell. So here's a good graphic on connecting with AVS, because it's like how you would connect from on-prem into Azure. This is how AVS connects into Azure. We have that express route with FastPath. It's a secure connection up to 10 gigabytes. If you enable FastPath, I've heard it can go even faster. And then we have those availability zones to maximize your performance, make sure you're in the same one, or maximize your resiliency by being in 2 different ones. We have private endpoints that create another secure connection for talking to Azure services. You don't traverse the internet. And then the private DNS zones, so you can look up the FQDN and get the proper IP for the internal VM. Subnet delegation and integration. Items like Azure NetApp files, they have a delegated subnet, or you can create one for your private endpoints, and that just helps secure everything with that private IP address. And then getting into AVS, we can use things like an application gateway with a web application firewall to make sure everything's secure and you can get in. So traffic flows and zones of trust. I work with a lot of AVS network engineers, and they always tell me, know your flows. So, because there's so many different options. We have so many different scenarios. They're all online. We have some great people that put up what you can do where. Because you might, AVS, do you want it to go out to the internet? Or do you want it to go back on-prem, get inspected, and then go out to the internet? If you enable ExpressRoute Global Reach, where you have an ExpressRoute connection on-prem, you have one with AVS, and you peer those, well, now it's a layer 3 connection, but now it's bypassing that Azure firewall. So is that a problem? Do you need to inspect it, force the traffic, like set a default route using a vWAN hub? You know, there's a lot of options that you can get into if you're really into networking. So know your flows, consider internet egress. HCX is a great migration tool, and then you can use NSX2 if you're very familiar with that, like with public IP space. And then we have third-party firewalls to help inject those routes as needed. So the initial deployment, though, it's not connected. You have that Azure Express route to that dedicated enterprise edge router into Azure, but you got to set up the connection. So this is what you get. And this is like the standard networking topology, the simple use case scenario. You have your edge device, you have your Express route connected in, and then you have that Express route gateway. And we have different SKUs for performance. We also have that fast path enablement. So that gets you into those Azure VNets to get you those Azure services. Again, blob storage, SQL managed instance, security, Entra ID, all the fun stuff. So that's what we see commonly for connection into Azure. But then connecting to on-prem, you have your ExpressRoute gateway, and then you have the edge device for your ExpressRoute. So you're connecting in. Well, now we can enable that global reach, that layer 3 connectivity, so they can talk back and forth. It is going to bypass that VNet unless you start routing it through, a virtual WAN hub, or there's Azure Route Server 2 to set default routes. But that's a really high-speed connection right into AVS. And then hybrid management, we really recommend using a jump box. We have what's called Bastion versus like using RDP. So use Bastion to connect in. And then you can manage your vCenter on-prem or manage your vCenter inside AVS, but it's a good way to connect securely. Then there's NSX gateways with AVS. So if you are familiar with NSX as a VMware admin, you do get the Tier 0 and Tier 1 gateway. Tier 0 is, sorry about that. Tier 0 is managed by Microsoft. So you do have to use Azure Route Server to inject a BGP policy. But then that Tier 1 gateway is where you can create your segments and then have your east-west traffic flows or your north and south traffic flows. So that's another option where you can use NSX with public IP as well. So we talked about connecting. Now how do we migrate? Well, HCX Enterprise is included. It used to just be advanced, and then people had to upgrade, but now you just get HCX Enterprise. The biggest use cases are OS-assisted vMotion. You can convert like a Hyper-V or KVM VM into VMware. Replication-assisted vMotion, where it uses that storage replication. So you can do a live bulk migration with 0 downtime. Mobility groups. Obviously, when you migrate, you want your application server with your database. You don't want one going over and then traversing the internet or your express route going back and forth. So you create those mobility groups, traffic engineering. And then what's really cool is MON, the mobility optimized networking, where it gets rid of any asymmetrical traffic. So if a VM was used to talking to a VM on-prem, and it's not going to try to go back and then come back, and kind of prevents tromboning of network flows. So here's just a cool little graphic, just how HCX, you create your site pair. You can use it for large-scale migration. You can use it for layer 2 migration, like keep your IP. It's on-prem, this IP. You migrate into AVS, same IP, everything's up and running. It's data encryption in transit, and you can go from on-prem to cloud or cloud to cloud. It also can convert legacy VMware VMs into the later version as well. So here's the overview of kind of how the application works. You have your site pairing. You go into AVS, and you can download an OVA, and then you deploy an OVA like you would any template on-prem, and you spin up your connector. And then once you have that plugin enabled in vCenter, you can create your site pairing. And that's really creating like compute profiles, networking profiles to map out and create the service mesh what's actually going to help you migrate. So it's like a layer 2 extension, native capability, but it has like Suite B encryption, built-in WAN optimization, dedupe, and compression. And it's really agnostic to your on-prem vMotion environment. It's a completely separate entity for migration. But you can do, yeah, online and offline VM migration. And it now is supported over VPN, which is pretty cool. It used to be only ExpressRoute, but now you can use it over VPN as well. So hey, it's included with your AVS subscription. It's pretty much what I said already. You have the hybrid interconnect. You'll see those appliances deploy. You create your service mesh. And then you have the options like RAV-assisted vMotion, OS-assisted migration, mobility groups, and traffic engineering, and so on. Again, just a quick overview, like cold migration, obviously you're going to have a downtime. You're powering off the VMs, migrating them over. HCX vMotion, I'll show you later. No downtime, it's just like vMotioning on-prem. Minimal downtime is the bulk migration because it's using that replication assistant, picks a switchover window that you tell it to, and then does that quick switchover. You can do like parallel replication. Same with replication-assisted vMotion. It's replicating, does that final delta sync, migrates over. And then, of course, with the conversion downtime for OS-assisted migration, OSAM, it's going to take a little bit and convert the OS, but there'll be some downtime. So now we're actually into the demo of the HCX migration, and then I'm going to attach it to Azure Arc and enable updates through the portal. So if I double-click, it should play. So here I'm on the vCenter on premises. I have a workload here. You can see the IP, hopefully. I can't tell from here. And it's just showing that the network interface is on-prem. I'm going into HCX. It's already set up, because it takes a while to do, to set up the site pairing and interconnectivity. But we're going to pick a migration. And then you can give it a workload name if you're going to do like a bunch of groups to keep track of. So here's the interface, though. Like I said, the group name, you can select multiple VMs if you're going to do a bunch at the same time. Pick your destination of compute and storage. Well, and you have to go to vSAN for this at least. So if you have NetApp, like Azure NetApp files, you can eventually storage vMotion over, but it's like for like with vSAN. So we're going to migrate over. And there's different options too for the vMotion or bulk migration. And you'll just see, I've sped this up a little bit, but it's going to start migrating. You can watch the tasks and events pop up on the right, but just keep track that nothing's going wrong. I know it's really exciting to watch a vMotion, but considering it'd be like from Chicago to Switzerland, you know, so it's pretty cool. And keep the same IP. But here we go, it's moving. And it's almost done, and I'll prove to you that it's online in a few seconds. Come on. There we go, migration complete. Let's go into vCenter. VM is gone. Okay, it's migrated. That's my other workload. So I'm going to go into my vCenter in AVS. And you get this URL and credentials in the portal. And you can see the workload's migrated. It's got the same IP. It's all happy. And now, though, I can integrate Azure services, because now I'm in Azure. I'm in AVS, so I can Arc enable this VM, which I ran the PowerShell script to just onboard it. And then it registers into Azure. So now it's treated like an Azure resource. I can create policies. I can create updates. I can use Sentinel or Defender for Cloud. So there's a lot of choices to make, and you can kind of have that single pane of glass visibility of all your VMs in one place. So I'm going to enable updates. I see this use case a lot. Like a lot of people love to use the update manager with Arc enabling their vSphere VMs. So you can manage them all in one place. This is just creating like a patch window for your VM. So if you have a group of VMs you want to patch together, they have a certain window where they can be patched and have an outage if you're going to allow rebooting and stuff. So that's pretty much all that's doing. So you see your workload. They always show up as purple. You know they're VMware enabled or Arc enabled VMs. And then you can choose which updates you allow, like different KBs. Then once you create that, now your VM's on a patch schedule. So we've deployed it. Now it's on a maintenance schedule reboot if required. You can still change that on the fly. Maybe that's a little too scary. Maybe you want to never reboot. You want to reboot it yourself while you can watch it. So that's always an option. But now we can also set up security too. So now there's Defender for Cloud. And you would go into Defender for Cloud environment settings, and you make sure Defender for Servers is enabled. And here it already is, because I work for Microsoft. They won't let me disable things, so this is already on for me. But I wanted to show you how to enable it, and then how you'll see it's already been scanned, and it's going to give me recommendations about vulnerabilities. So we'll go back to security. And it has 4 recommendations. Shows it's on. It shows you the severity. And then you can see how there's additional recommendations in Defender for Cloud. So you can migrate to AVS and also integrate with so many different Azure services, and security being a big one is really good. And on to Liam for...
Thanks, Amy. And Azure Arc is a powerful service, not only for workloads that you're running on Azure VMware Solution, but also those that reside on premises or even in other clouds. And you can use it as a common management plane to unite all of them and manage all of them. Now, previously, I showed you some of our different SKU options, and I shared with you the storage capacity, the RAM, the cache, and all of that. And one common question we get is, hey, do I have to purchase more AVS hosts if I require additional storage? And the answer is simply no. So let's start with the fact that, with AVS, VMware vSAN is your primary storage. It's fully configured, all-flash vSAN storage local to the cluster, and deduplication and compression is enabled by default. And it has 2 disk groups, 1 that is a cache disk, and then 3 that are dedicated capacity disks. Now, once you're in Azure, you can expand that storage capacity with things like Azure Blob Storage, Azure Files, and File Sync. But we also have some first-party and third-party Azure services that are even more flexible for some of those storage-intensive workloads. And that include things like Azure NetApp Files, Azure ElasticSAN, and Pure Storage. And we have a couple of different options for Pure Storage. Amy, when would you recommend using these different options, and what are some of the distinct advantages of each?
Sure. Azure NetApp Files, that's our first-party service. Especially if you're a NetApp shop, why not? You can use NFS and use the snapshots and dedupe and compression. It's a popular service because, again, you don't have to add an ESXi host and spend money on compute and CPU. You just add some more storage and then vMotion over to it. So NetApp Files is a great solution. Azure ElasticSAN is just now GA for AVS, so that's another cool solution. It kind of emulates your SAN on premises. It's 𝗬𝗲𝗀 block-based. You start out with like 16 terabytes, and then you can expand on demand. And then there's also the Pure Storage offering, and they're here today or this week. And I know they have a cool demo to show because they have this third-party offering, the Pure Storage, cloud storage, the block storage. So it's just 𝗬𝗲𝗀 block-based storage in AVS. But now they also have a setup similar to Azure NetApp, where it's like you create a service account, you create your disk pools, and now it's Pure Storage running in AVS. So there's 2 solutions now from Pure, which is pretty cool. So if you're a Pure customer, you can also bring your licenses in, and if you're familiar with their technology, so you have a lot of choices.
We love Pure and we love all our partners, but I'd love if you could show us a quick demo of how you can integrate with Azure NetApp Files.
Yeah, it's really easy to do. Let's see. So here we're back into the Azure portal, and I'm just checking that my VNet gateway is the right SKU. You definitely have to be on a performance SKU because you're going to be pushing that throughput. So we have the VNet gateway connection. It's got the right SKU, and we need FastPath configured. So FastPath, that's an important prerequisite for running ANF. So we have that configured, and we'll go back, and you just type in Azure NetApp Files, and you're going to create an account. So we'll create that account. Just give it a name. Make sure it's the right resource group if you have a storage resource group. And then of course, location, very important. You want it close to AVS. So deployment's complete. Now we can create our disk pools. So our capacity pools. So you add your pool and you give it a name. There's different tiers, premium, ultra, standard. So depending on your storage needs, you can up it or down the IOPS on it and QoS settings as well. So we started with 4 terabytes. And now we're going to create that volume. So give it a usable name. Give it the 4 terabyte quota. And then you can mess with throughput. But then we have that virtual network and that delegated subnet that I mentioned earlier. So you can create that on the fly here, but usually I like to map it out before I deploy. So it's just delegated for ANF. And then availability zone, once again, really important. Put it in the same availability zone as Azure VMware Solution, so our storage is close to our compute. And then it's dual protocol, so you can do NFS, SMB, run both. And then that check mark's really important if you're going to do Azure VMware Solution Data Store. And you can actually mount it to several clusters at the same time, but right now we're going to mount it to one. So you review and create, you're creating your volume. And we go in, and now we're going to go see if it shows up. So we're going to have to add it here. So we're going to connect the volume. We already see our vSAN. So again, just using that account we created, the capacity pool, the volume. You just go through the portal, but then you can select your cluster, and it's going to mount it for you. Let's get our new volume. Select our cluster, and then give it that data store name. I know that's always a big deal with your naming standards, so please adhere to them. Review and create, and now we're going to see that it's going to show up. So we'll create it in Azure Portal. And now it's showing up in vCenter. So we have ANF Data Store. Now, hey, look, we have a file server. Why don't we migrate it to NetApp instead of having it run on vSAN? So this is just going to show you a quick storage vMotion, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Right-click, vMotion, same cluster, different data store. But now you're freeing up that vSAN, and you're giving more space. So you don't have to add another host. You can do this with Pure as well, or the Azure Elastic SAN. It's just a great way to be flexible and meet all your needs, because if you want to move a big file server and it makes sense, you can do this. And so there you go. It's the storage vMotion. It's running on ANF, and that's how easy it is to connect into your cluster. So we've migrated, we've connected, we've integrated a little bit. Ḥసం and Prasad will talk about that later in the week, but day one best practices. We have that well-architected framework, and we do have an assessment where you answer the questions and make sure you're ready, and you have your /22 configured. We have those best practices baked in with the Azure AVS landing zones built upon Azure landing zones. So again, you can deploy with security best practices, maybe some monitoring. You can pick and choose, but you just customize it to your level. And then, of course, we have these critical designs for BCDR. We have options for those, security, governance, and compliance with firewalls, baseline monitoring, network topology, and connectivity. It's all baked in, so you can focus on what you need and that you're secure right from day one. And then this just really shows how much it takes in for you. So 80% is kind of configured for you. Again, best practices from partners, other customers, lessons we've learned as Microsoft, and you're just customizing it with your data, your CIDR, if you're deploying with certain firewalls. It's just walking you through, but making sure you're not just deploying and you're up and running and you're exposed to the internet and I deployed AVS. So it's a really good way to get started. And it's really, again, it could be automated, and it can also use Terraform, ARM, Bicep. And we have that zero trust approach, because at Microsoft now, we have that zero trust approach with Azure. So we have use managed identity, defend your endpoints with Microsoft Defender. We have data encryption, apps, or use certificates, and then infrastructure like networks, DDoS protection. Definitely give users the least amount of privilege they need. That's why you get a cloud admin account. Just kind of assuming breach and minimizing that impact. So we have that zero trust and lock everything down, and then expand as needed. So like I mentioned, you get all the security because you're in Azure. So we have the Azure Integrated Security. We have these hardened data centers. I remember seeing a video, I think, maybe it was 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗶ecie, he like showed a F-150 trying to breach the fence or something. I don't know. So they're pretty cool. They're hardened man traps and everything. And then you have that VMware provided security where they're encrypting the vMotion traffic. You're getting the patching, the data encryption at rest. And then private cloud security, again, firewalls, whether it's third-party firewalls or the Azure firewall, the pen testing, alerting, two-factor. Definitely recommend MFA. We have that running everywhere. So, and role-based access controls. So, security is a big, big deal. And again, mentioning that Microsoft security ecosystem, definitely Entra ID, or you can even utilize Azure Active Directory with AVS. Active Directory, yes. And then MFA, super important. Data encryption, it's encrypting at the disk level. Azure Key Vault, you can now bring your own keys to encrypt your data and rotate them when you want to. Revoke access. The network security options, vWAN, ExpressRoute, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Azure Log Analytics is really cool. And then what's really neat is Microsoft Sentinel. We're the only cloud to have like a first-party SIEM tool to aggregate all those logs. And then it's actually AI enabled with Security Copilot to help you detect threats and remediate faster. So do you want to kickstart your AVS journey today?
Yeah, so what we talked about today is some of the foundational things that we recommend as you migrate over to Azure and once you land there. Again, we'll have some more sessions later this week on how you can do even more. And we want to help you kickstart your AVS journey. So please stop by our booth. We do have demos that we can show you related to security as well as networking. Amy mentioned the MON policy rules. We've got a really cool demo we can show you there. But in the meantime, I encourage you to take advantage of some of these links. We have documentation available online. We've got a wonderful digital event that we recently put on a couple months ago. And with that, we dive into a lot of these topics in much deeper level detail than we can do here today. With that, we also have a click-through demo so you can go through and get some hands-on experience going through an HCX migration in a guided format. And then we have our cloud adoption framework. We've also got ways to help you accelerate your adoption with expert help and resources. So for example, we have Azure Innovate. It's a great way to help you tack on AI solutions to what you migrate over to Azure, as well as build custom cloud-native applications. We have Azure Migrate and Modernize, and these folks help you securely and efficiently move existing workloads from on-prem into Azure and enhance your application and data experiences with some of the offerings that I shared with you today. And then we've got Azure Essentials, which is a new program, and that really helps you elevate your reliability, security, and ongoing performance. So you can scan that code to learn more. In just a second here, we'll be happy to take your questions. I think we might do some up here, some out in the hallway, and maybe some at happy hour. Again, thank you for joining us. We want to thank you, and please tell us how we did. We value your feedback. So with this, you can scan this QR code, and again, we want to hear your feedback and comments. I hope you enjoy your time at Ignite. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.